Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 15th, 2020, and this is the time and place for the hearing examiner's proceedings for docket number 2020-024, cause number 191-09, in the matter of the request for agency action of Running Foxes Petroleum Corporation, also known as Running Foxes Petroleum, Inc., for an order to, one, conditionally approving the conversion of the TXO 14-2 well located in the southwest quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 14, Township 20 South, Range 23 East, Salt Lake Meridian, Grand County, Utah, to a Class 2 injection well for enhanced recovery, and two, approving waterflood operations in the Dakota D1 sandstone in the southwest quarter of Section 14 of Township 20 South, Range 23 East, Salt Lake Meridian, Grand County, Utah, and certification of said operations as an enhanced recovery project. My name is John Baza. I'm the director of the Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and I have been appointed by the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining as the hearing examiner in this matter. We are holding this hearing virtually because of the restrictions of the COVID-19 pandemic. I wish to thank the division personnel, legal counsel, petitioners, and department technical staff for allowing this proceeding to go forth remotely. I also acknowledge that we have a court reporter transcribing this hearing, and I would ask that as we proceed that we all take direction from the court reporter in order to ensure an accurate record of today's proceeding. So we'll take proceedings of counsel at this time, and first from the petitioner, Fred McDonald. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Baza. Fred McDonald of counsel with Lear & Lear on behalf of the petitioner, Running Foxes.
Okay, and from the division?
Gordon Rowe, Assistant Attorney General for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
All right, and assisting me as legal counsel for the hearing examiner is Haley Sosa of the Utah Attorney General's office. I'd like to also recognize that we were to have participating electronically representatives of the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. Do we have those representatives on the line today? Okay, so no one's speaking up or acknowledging that. They may chime in later, but I think we were giving them the opportunity to participate electronically. So Mr. McDonald, I guess we're going to go ahead and let you have opening remarks and case in chief and present your witnesses, and we'll go to that point.
Thank you, Mr. Baza. With us today virtually is Mr. Stephen Tedesco, who is the owner of Running Foxes and the geologist. He will be the sole witness today. However, also virtually available if questions are asked are Mr. Joe Taglieri, who is the president of Running Foxes and a geologist, and Mr. Nafi Onat, who is the consulting petroleum engineer. We do not intend to have them as witnesses, but if there are questions, they're available as well. So at this time, I would ask that Mr. Tedesco be sworn in.
All right, and we'll have the court reporter conduct that swearing in.
Will you raise your right hand, please? You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Tedesco's resume was submitted as part of Exhibit A along with Mr. Tagliari's and Mr. Onet's, but again, Mr. Tedesco will be the only one testifying. If he was asked, he will confirm all of the contents reflected in his resume. However, since this is the first time he is testifying in a board matter, he will provide a brief summary of his qualifications to be recognized as an expert both in geology and water flood operations for the purposes of this cause at the commencement of his testimony. I'd like to make sure that the hearing examiner and counsel all have, and the division personnel, all received the replacement Exhibit F and the new Exhibit K that were filed yesterday.
Yes, I did receive that. Did the attorneys receive that?
That the division received that.
All right, we'll be utilizing that in our PowerPoint presentation. And as normally the practice with the board, Mr. Hearing Examiner, I would ask that it's acceptable to move for the admission of all of my exhibits at the end of our presentation in chief.
Certainly.
With that, Running Foxes today seeks approval of a 40-acre water flood project to enhance Dakota 1 sandstone oil production involving 2 wells on the same federal leasehold in Grand County. One of the wells, the TXO 14-2 well, is to be converted to a Class 2 injection well. Board approval of the injection is directly required because the injection will be into a hydrocarbon producing zone and also for enhanced recovery purposes. As the testimony and evidence presented will establish, Running Fox satisfies all of the regulatory requirements set forth in Utah Administrative Code Rules R649-5-1 and R649-3-37, subparagraph 1, for such approvals. Running Fox also seeks board approval and certification of this water flood as an enhanced recovery project for purposes of qualifying for the severance tax reduction. As set forth in our request for agency action, board approval of the conversion of the 14-2 well to an injection well is to be contingent upon the division's approval of a conforming UIC-1 application. True and correct copies of the applicable regulations to the requested approvals were collectively submitted as Exhibit B in this cause. The board has jurisdiction over the matter pursuant to Utah Code Annotated Sections 40-6-5, subparagraph 3C, 40-6-7, subparagraph 1, and 59-5-102, subparagraph 9, as well as Utah Administrative Code Rules R649-337 and R649-5-1. Notice was sent via certified mail return receipt requested to all surface owners, all owners as that term is defined by statute and regulation, and all operators within a half-mile radius of the proposed water flood project area. All mineral leasehold and production interest owners also were notified in that area. These mailings were sent to the parties at their last addresses disclosed by the relevant Bureau of Land Management and Grand County Realty records and Running Fox's internal records. All of them received copies, as was confirmed by the return receipts. The record would also reflect that notice was duly published on September 3rd, 2020 in the Moab Times Independent and on September 6th, 2020 in the Salt Lake Tribune and Deseret Morning News. By order entered August 24th, 2020, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this matter was referred to the hearing examiner for virtual hearing today pursuant to Utah Administrative Code Rule R641-113-100 and the executive order of Governor Herbert. The division elected not to submit a staff memorandum in this cause, and no other objections or responses were received. With that, I'll commence my examination of Mr. Tedesco. Mr. Tedesco, would you please state your name and business address for the record? I believe you're going to have to unmute.
I was unmuted, but I guess it muted me. Anyway, my name is Stephen Anthony Tedesco, Tedesco. My business address is 14550 East Easter Avenue, Suite 200, Centennial, Colorado, 80112.
And what is your position with Running Foxes?
I'm the owner of the 50% owner of the company, and I supervise all operations in terms of land, petroleum engineering, geology, production, exploration, etc.
All right, thank you. Would you please provide to the hearing examiner the corporate and bonding status of Running Foxes?
Running Foxes is in good standing with the state of Colorado, and all of our bonds are presently approved and in place with the state of Utah and the Bureau of Land Management.
And you're duly authorized to conduct business in the state of Utah as well?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Since this is Running Fox's first appearance before the board or the division, could you just give a brief introduction about the company and its operations?
Yes, we are very active in the state of Utah and Grand County. We just acquired the Cisco Dome from Rocky Mountain Standard, which has brought our wells in the state of Utah up to 90. But we also have operations in eastern Kansas, where we have 4 water floods that I've been producing from for over 10 years. Total of 60 wells, half injectors, half producers. They're a lot shallower than in the state of Utah, anywhere from 210 feet down to 600 feet. And then we also have operations in the state of Missouri, up in northwest Missouri, and just over the border from Scott, Kansas. And recently we just drilled a development well in the state of Montana, up near Mosby, Montana. And so that's basically our operations, and we basically do everything from cradle to grave.
All right, would you please outline for the hearing examiner and counsel your educational background, your work experience, particularly in Utah, and also with respect to water flood operations, and also any publications, any qualifications as an expert before other similar boards, etc.
Okay. My background is basically a geologist. I got a BS in geology from Northeastern University in Boston, then an MS from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. And then I have a PhD with a minor in petroleum engineering from the Colorado School of Mines. My focus on my PhD was coal bed methane and reservoir characterization, as well as fracking and determining how to best get production up. I've written several papers, both on geology, actually in the Uncompahgre Grand County area, as well as other areas in the country where we work, as well as water flood operations. And I've been before the state of Colorado board, as well as Missouri, in terms of asking for various things.
All right, with that and in his resume, I would ask that Mr. Tedesco be recognized as an expert in geology and water flood operations for purposes of this cause.
Do I hear any objections from the division?
Just a quick clarifying question. Mr. Tedesco, were you qualified as an expert in Colorado and I believe Kansas, you said, when you testified in front of those boards?
No, I was not. I was just at the hearing presenting.
Okay. With that, the division doesn't have any other voir dire, and we do not object to having Mr. Tedesco appear as an expert for the purposes of this hearing.
Very well. For the purposes of this hearing, Mr. Tedesco is qualified as an expert.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baza. I'm now going to be making the presentation. Hopefully everybody will be able to see it. Is everybody be able to see this screen?
Looks good to me, Fred.
Okay. Mr. Tedesco, I'm now going to show you what have been marked as exhibits C and D for purposes of this hearing. Do you recognize these exhibits?
Yes, I do.
And were they prepared by you or Running Fox personnel with your review and input?
They were all prepared for by me. We've reduced staff because of downturn on prices, so I've become jack of all trades.
Understood. Okay, turning now to Exhibit C, which is shown on the screen right now. Would you please explain to the hearing examiner and counsel what this represents?
Yes, the upper part is basically a map of I-70 showing the area in relation to I-70. And I forget which exit goes to Moab, but it's close by there. We're really off exit 213 Danish Flats, I believe. Also used to be called Cisco Springs. Then the insert below is more of a detail. for where we were talking about for the TXO 14.1 and the TXO 14.2 in the yellow square. This map was actually taken from the state of Utah's very nice GIS system online. So all those wells are from the state of Utah's records. And then to the left, the map there gives you an inset or more detail of the 14.2 and the 14.1. It's structure also on the Dakota sand, which was mapped actually not by me, but a previous geologist from 10 years ago, but the data is still good, showing in relation to other wells in the area.
And just for clarification, the proposed water flood is the southwest quarter of section 14 where the two wells are located?
Yes, it is.
Okay, turning your attention now to Exhibit D, would you please explain to the board or to the hearing examiner and counsel what this represents?
This represents the, right now, until recently, we took over Cisco Dome. We had nothing but Bureau of Land Management leases. And this represents those leases that we are operator and leasee for out here in Township 20 South, Range 23 East. The black dotted line is I think is a half mile from the TXO 14.2. The little part of the white is owned by a private individuals, which we've talked to, and they've raised no objections. And there's no groundwater in the area. We did actually try to test for groundwater at one time and did not find anything. I believe the closest groundwater is south into the Colorado River, which I don't believe anyone can have access to.
All right, again, just for clarification, the southwest quarter of section 14 is covered by one single federal lease.
Yes.
And the only production interest owners are who?
Running Fox's Petroleum and the United States government.
Okay, and also the clarification of the private owner, their surface owner of that white area in the southeast quarter of section 14, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Mr. Tedesco, I believe you have in your file there a certificate of mailing that was prepared by my office. It's a pleading that's on file in this matter. I'd ask you to take a look at that. Do you recognize the names and addresses that are shown on that certificate?
Yes, I do.
And who are those parties?
I don't have it up in front of me, but it's U.S. Bureau of Land Management. It's exhibit again.
No, it's a certificate of service. Are these the people that are in that half-mile radius?
Yes.
Okay. And as a reminder to counsel and the hearing examiner, these are the parties required to be notified under Rule R649-5-1 2.8. How were these names and addresses compiled, Mr. Tedesco?
Based on our records and based on Bureau of Land Management records, as well as Graham County records.
And then as far as water wells, the state engineer's records were searched as well?
Yes.
Okay, directing the hearing examiner and counsel's attention to Exhibit Z, which is filed in here. These are true and correct copies of the return receipts received by my office of the mailing of the requests, and they show that all parties received the mailing. Pointing out again that Exhibits D and Z satisfy Rule 649-5-1, subparagraphs 2.2, 2.8, and 2.9. Now, Mr. Tedesco, I'm going to direct your attention again to exhibits, what have been marked as Exhibits E, Replacement F, and K for purposes of this hearing. I believe you already testified, but just again for the record, you prepared these exhibits as well?
Yes, I prepared them all.
Okay, turning your attention to Exhibit E, which should be on your screen right now, would you please explain to the hearing examiner and counsel what this represents?
This is a density neutron dual induction log for the TXO 14-2 and basically identifies the Dakota D1 and D2 sands that are of interest to us, as they've been the oil productive zones in this well, as well as the adjacent TXO 14-1.
And this is where the definition that was shown in the request for agent action for the zone of injection and production, that's where this was taken off of this log?
Yes.
Okay,
and
can you, go ahead.
There is no drinking water in any of these sands. It's fairly briny. And so we're not in, it's an oil and gas zone, primarily oil for these two wells.
So in other words, it's not a safe drinking water aquifer.
No,
All right. There's notification or indication on this log that there are confining barriers above and below the injection zone. Is that correct? What are those comprised of?
the barrier overlying is the Mancos Shale, which goes all the way to surface. It is a carbonaceous shale that's very dense with some little bit of sandstone, but primarily mudstone shale material. Then in between the sands is a similar type of shale, but not as carbonaceous. It's more of a non-carbonaceous shale, but it represents a confining layer.
All right. And do you also intend to put any plugs in to help also isolate the injection zone?
We're going to put a plug in right below the above the Dakota D2 sand in order to isolate the D1. So the D1 will be the one we inject into.
All right. Again, for the hearing examiner and counsel's reference, this is required under R 649-5-1 2.6. All right, Mr. Tedesco, now turning your attention to what has been marked as replacement exhibit F, would you please explain what this represents?
This represents the TXO 14-2 and the TXO 14-1 in cross section, showing their position. And as we can see, the TXO 14-2 Dakota D1 and D2 sands is much lower than in the TXO 14-1. As far as we can tell, the sands are isolated from adjacent wells, and we provided water chemistry to support that from 2 other wells we did sample. But essentially, it shows that there's the sands are continuous between these 2 wells. They're not that far apart.
All right, turning your attention now to new exhibit K, would you please explain to what this represents?
This aerial view was taken from Google Earth, and then on it I placed all the other wells in the area. In the upper left-hand corner is the TXO 14-1 and the TXO 14-2 and the TXO 14-3. We were going to try to use the TXO 14-3, and the reason we delayed the hearing is we reevaluated it, and it's now going to be plugged and abandoned. It was fracked at one time, but it doesn't seem to have any permeability, or at least permeability sufficient enough for a water flood. The TXO 14-4 is already plugged and abandoned. But most importantly is down in the bottom right corner is the TXO 23-1C and the TXO 23-1. Ambra, at one time, and I think it was like 20 years ago, tried to use natural gas to essentially flood the Dakota sand. And actually they were somewhat successful. They did it for only a couple months, if I remember correctly. And they increased production by about 20%. But then they ceased, and we don't know why, but it may just have been the price of oil. But essentially, we do know that based on this, and also work being done over at Cisco Dome by Summit, I think it's petroleum, they've been watering some sands over there, and they've had some success. And then our experience on water flooding in eastern Kansas, similar type of sandstones in terms of reservoir characteristics, imply to us that we should have some sort of success, especially using water, and should increase the recovery by a significant amount.
All right, we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So in your expert geologic opinion, do the geologic characteristics of the project area make it attractive for a water flood project?
Yes, it does.
And is it also your expert opinion that the upper and lower confining layers of shale are sufficient geologic barriers to prevent migration?
Yes.
Okay, now turning your attention to what have been marked as exhibits G through J. Oh, excuse me, I went one too far. Again, you indicated that you had prepared all of these exhibits, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Turning your attention to exhibit G, which is not shown on the PowerPoint. This was an exhibit filed. Would you please explain to the hearing examiner and counsel what it represents?
Is this the water one?
Yes.
Okay, so initially we did some water testing to try to determine what sort of chemicals we would need to help production for the Cisco SS 15-8, the TXO 23 Mesa 23-1, and the TXO 14-1. And what we discovered is instead of thinking, supporting that we might have a regional sandstone of similar reservoir characteristics in terms of fluids, instead we got a number of differences that make each well unique. Then upon further examination, we determined from looking at the reservoir characteristics that we had an isolated sand pod at the TXO 14.2, 14.3, and 14.1. And that the TXO MESA 23-1 and the TXO 23-1C are also in a separate isolated pod, and that their chemistry is somewhat different.
All right, and again, is the plan to use the water primarily from the 14.1 well for injection?
Yes, we think at this time that it produces significant amount of water to have plenty of water for a limited water flood that we are trying to do, basically to test this concept.
All right, and is it your understanding from this analysis and that water would be compatible for injection?
Yes.
All right. Again, for the hearing examiner and counsel's benefit, this is required under R649-5-2, 2.7. Okay, turning your attention now to Exhibit H, would you please explain what this represents?
Part of this represents the present layout, in other words, where the equipment is on the TXO 14-2. What is added here is the ejection shed with the piping from the 300 barrel tank that's the lowest to the injection shed, and then a pipeline to the wellhead. So this is just how it will look like from a surface facility. The area is already disturbed. The BLM has not said anything about culture or wildlife surveys because it's part of the well pad, the existing well pad.
Right. Now, turning your attention to Exhibit I, this is a 2-page exhibit that are shown on the PowerPoint. Would you explain what this represents?
This is the UIC application for injection well.
And would you outline what is the injection rate that you're proposing?
Up to 20 barrels a day, no more than 600 PSI.
All right, and is the cement bond log for the 14.2 well on file with the division already?
Yes, it is.
All right, have you conducted a mechanical integrity test on the 14.2 well yet?
No, we haven't. We were waiting to see what the decision of the division is, and then I assume they'll request one, and then we'll go forward and do that at that time.
And it's your expert opinion that at this rate and pressure and given the geologic characteristics that you previously addressed, this water flood should not impact any adjacent lands?
Based on what we know, yes. It's not a very it's not an overpressured area, and we're not applying that much pressure to the reservoir.
Okay,
the goal is basically to see if it works and see how long it takes for we start to see increase in oil, which I personally feel it'd be 6 to 8 months just by these low rates.
All right, just for the record, the second page of Exhibit I is the wellbore schematic for the 14.2 well. Now turning your attention, Mr. Tedesco, to Exhibit J, would you please explain to the hearing examiner and counsel what this represents?
Well, based on Mr. Onat and I discussing about what was the likely recovery, I went ahead and put together a sort of a thumbnail economics to determine if it was worth doing or not. And we feel right now that the economics suggest that we will make money. And now this is based on, I believe, Mayer pricing, which is probably not that much different than it, well, it might be higher than it is at that time, but it should work regardless.
All right, so in your expert opinion as a water flood operations, does the 14.2 well appear to have sufficient integrity to handle the proposed injection at the rates and pressures that you
Yes, it does.
proposed?
Yes,
Is it also your expert opinion that the water flood is needed to recover resources that would otherwise be left in place?
There should be a significant amount of oil in place that we can't recover under primary terms. The TXO 14.1 has actually been a pretty good well for the last 30 years at generally at 3 to 5 barrels a day. But with additional pressuring up, we might get it back to where it was when it first started or close to it of maybe 20, 30, 40 barrels a day.
All right, and then is it also your expert opinion that the value of the projected incremental production substantially exceeds the cost incident to enhance recovery operations?
Yes, it does.
All right. Mr. Baza, that concludes my examination of Mr. Tedesco.
All right, well, I'll turn the time to division for any cross-examination they want to conduct.
Thank you, Director Baza. I have a few clarifying questions, and then if it's okay with you, I'll turn it over to Mr. Dane Doucette and Mr. Ammon McDonald to see if they have any questions of their own. First, Mr. Tedesco, does Running Foxes have an approximate timeline on when the 14.3 well will be plugged and abandoned?
I hope in the next couple months.
Okay, so would that occur before the water flood operations took place?
We try to do things sort of concurrently, so like to have 3 or 4 things being done at the same time. It keeps costs down. But I go based on the direction of the commission or you guys, if you want it done sooner, or if it's okay to do it at the same time, whatever works best for you guys.
Great, thank you. Let's see. This might be.
I don't expect the water flood, even if it was left open. I don't expect to get any pressure or water or oil coming out of the 14.3 during operations, if that was a concern.
Okay.
Because it's down dip. It's down dip, and usually stuff doesn't flow down unless you put a lot of pressure to it.
Thank you for the clarification. That helps. This might be better for Mr. McDonald, but in the certificate of service, just for the clarification, the San Arroyo Livestock LLC and Pro Petroco Incorporated, those the surface owners within the half-mile radius?
The San Arroyo is the surface owner, and then the Petroco owns operating rights in a shallower depth in one of the leases within the half-mile radius.
Okay, thank you.
And they seem to have gone out of business.
Okay. And has Running Foxes received any correspondence from the Bureau of Land Management regarding this request?
Unless Joe Taglieri says otherwise, I haven't seen anything. And they haven't mentioned in our discussions with them on other issues we're doing right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Doucette and Mr. McDonald, do you have any questions of your own?
Yeah, Gordon, this is Dane Doucette with the division. Just one comment, Mr. Tedesco.
Sure.
So even though we got the UIC Form 1 as part of the application for this board matter, that UIC Form 1 will still need to be submitted as a sundry through our e-permit system.
Okay.
All the additional information that's supplied in here, exhibits that you plan on using, we can pull those from here, but just that form itself will need to be submitted through e-permit as a sundry.
Perfect. I will get it done right away.
Okay. And I had no other further questions, Gordon.
Okay, Mr. McDonald, do you have anything?
Just a quick question. So, Mr. Tedesco, is this is more of a pilot project than an actual full-blown water flood then, just to see if it's going to be viable?
Yes, and we are actually staking with the BLM an offset up dip to the 14.1 based on some science we did. There seems to be additional locations. So as with all things that I do like this, I hope to eventually find out what the limits are, because that will increase oil revenue for all of us from a tax standpoint and that sort of thing.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, Director Baza, that's all the cross-examination from the division. Thank you.
Okay, I have one question from my point of view. And this can probably go to either Mr. Tedesco or Mr. McDonald as the counsel. I know in a lot of these cases, we often hear from the BLM saying that they support the proposed injection and water flood. We haven't in this case, but it's my understanding that because everything is occurring on a single federal lease, there's no need for unitization or communitization of interests. It'll just be a lease basis type of project. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So again, we don't need the concurrence from the BLM. It'd have been nice to have, but I think the beauty of this is it's occurring on a single lease.
I mean, if we do expand it, we'll come back and request more input from your office and that sort of thing and try to, make it work even better. So.
If I may also help explain on that, Mr. Baza, I can tell you from my work experience, the BLM has been overwhelmed. As you may know, besides the COVID situation, the March 18th earthquake caused that state office to be closed. And to my knowledge, it's still closed. And so it's been difficult getting a lot of any kind of correspondence out of that office.
That's understandable. Well, Mr. McDonald, I'll turn it back to you if you have any redirect examination.
I don't, Mr. Baza, but at this time, I would like to do some housekeeping and move for admission of exhibits A through E, replacement exhibit F, exhibits G through K, and exhibit Z.
Okay. Division, do you have any objection to that?
No objection from the division.
Very well. I will admit those exhibits as part of the hearing.
With that, Mr. Baza, I believe Mr. Tedesco's testimony along with the exhibits and the information provided in the request for agency action satisfy all the requirements under the applicable regulations for approval. Again, the approval is conditioned upon the division finding the UIC-1 application complete and approving it. But it does, everything is satisfied regulatorily for both the admission or the approval of this water flood project, as well as the enhanced certification for the tax severance relief. I want to personally thank you and the division and council for hearing this matter. I will prepare, presuming if it's granted, I will prepare an order in time for consideration by the board next week. And again, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Certainly, Mr. McDonald. Before we wrap up, I need to ask the division, do you have a presentation or any recommendation you would like to give?
The division does not have a case in chief, and the division would like to express its support for the request, and we appreciate everyone for participating today, given the circumstances.
Very good. Thank you. I need to ask my counsel, do you want to confer on this at all, Haley?
I don't see the need to, Director Baza. If you want to, I'm happy to take a call.
I'm very comfortable at this point. So let me just say that this is a hearing examination. So I have to provide a recommendation of findings and conclusions, and the board will actually issue the order. So that is what Mr. McDonald referred to. I would rule at this point that it's the decision of me as the hearing examiner that I support the project as being proposed by Running Foxes, and I would make an affirmative recommendation to the board that the request for agency action be approved. With that in mind, Fred, could I ask you to prepare the draft order and help with the findings for the hearing examiner?
Certainly, and I'll circulate that to Ms. Sousa and Mr. Rowe as well.
Perfect. Well, does anyone else have anything they want to say at this point? I'm looking, don't see any hands.
I just want to thank everybody for getting together and really appreciate you taking the time to listen to what we're doing.
Oh, well, certainly. I like the way these hearing examinations are running on an electronic basis. I can see that we've learned a few lessons since the beginning of the year, and we'll likely see more of this as time goes on. So this was a good case to work through.
Thanks.
Michelle, court reporter, do you have anything that you need to wrap up with me?
I don't, thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to call this proceeding adjourned, and we'll move forward and present the recommendations of the hearing examiner at the board's hearing on the 23rd.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.